Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. So, sense restraint. I saw lots of comments on the Discord that people expressing excitement that this is a very important topic and they're really looking forward to it. And that by itself is amazing, yeah? Because on the surface, I think most of us are like, ooh, do I have to? Is there any way to make this work without it? Sense restraint, yeah, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, as we begin to practice meditation, we start to get a sense of, yeah, how does it work? You know, why am I getting caught? Why am I getting distracted? Why am I getting lost? Why do I find myself sitting down on the chair or the meditation cushion and I'm a mess? You know, how did that happen? The day started so well. And the answer is sometimes sense restraint. And restraint of the sense faculties is the particular language of the Buddhist text. But today we're going to get to look at what that actually is experientially, what it feels like, how you apply it, how you train it, how you develop it. But first, how do you get to it? So if you're here, if you're paying attention, then you're interested in it, which means something has probably caused you to think that you can get a bit more out of your experience of life. You know, you've got a certain level of happiness, but you would like a certain bit more. And as a competent, rational human being, you feel it's your due. You know, you just have to apply a little energy, you'll get a bit more happiness. So it's very normal. Anybody in any walk of life could look at something like sense restraint and start to say, I bet I could do that. I bet I could be more peaceful or be more controlled or be more disciplined. And I bet I could avoid a lot of suffering. So about anybody can learn about this and try it out and practice it. But sense restraint shows up in a very particular scheme in the Buddha's discourses on how to train the mind, and specifically when he called the Anupubbasika, or the step-by-step training. And this step-by-step training starts with basic steps, you know, that shave off huge amounts of suffering from our lives, and gradually step up to subtler and subtler steps that shave off, you know, less and less, the more subtle and minute bits of suffering, until at last there's no suffering at all. So in the gradual training, you don't go immediately to sense restraint. First, morality. And so if you've gotten here now, but you find that you're still dealing with the basic 5 precepts, you don't have to take this too seriously, because sense restraint is not going to yield much results if your life is still violent or scary or morally precarious. You're still dealing with addiction or intoxicants. If your speech is very bad, you're in some sort of business or livelihood where you have to make a lot of morally gray or bad decisions, then work on that. And it's not a failure. It's just your meditation is not going to get into the subtle realms while you're dealing with that. But now most of us find that on a daily basis, we don't have to kill to survive. We've got what we need, so we don't have to be stealing from our neighbors, and we don't have to lock our doors or put a shotgun, you know, under the windowsill to keep people from stealing our stuff. We live in a slightly more peaceful environment. And this is a blessing. And it's in this environment we find ourselves starting to notice a slightly more subtle layer of suffering. I'm going to point this out because we all know this. It's something like a malaise or a subtle layer of anxiety, a layer of dust on the mind. And we, at first, we're just vaguely aware it's there. It's like I have everything I need to survive, and still, I'm not totally happy. I'm comfortable, but from time to time, that doesn't matter. I'm still there. And we start to look at the situations in our life where this becomes exacerbated. And it's after binge watching a television show, or it's after having to do a bunch of hours of work at the computer, or it's after having been out all night dancing and listening to loud music. It's after having gone to the movies and, sat in a chair for 3 hours, with all of our senses being bombarded. And we come back and we're still, shaken. Rather than relaxed, we're worn out. So we start to get a sense that something is happening. And we live in a very special time in modern culture. Just about everybody is coming to terms with this. Yeah? Because even people who have no even slightest inkling about Buddhist or spiritual practice are finding, I need to spend less time at the TV. I need to sit at the computer less. I need to be careful what social media programs I go onto because it's making me absolutely flaming miserable. So everybody is becoming aware of this because we are so bombarded by different sensual stimuli. So in the Buddha's time, you might be walking down a dirt road, and you would see somebody attractive, and you'd be like, "Oh, they're looking pretty good." And you'd go a bit further, and you'd smell, beautiful flowers coming from somebody's garden, and you'd be like, "Oh, I wish I had flowers like that." You'd go into town, and there'd be, a circus, and people would be dancing, and you'd be like, "Oh, do I have a couple coins? Can I get into the circus?" You would have stuff going on, but you would have hours in between those sense contacts, yeah? But in the modern day, it's just one after the other, and we can get them literally with the push of a button. But it's not the computer, it's not the TV, it's not the refrigerator, yeah? It's not the radio. These are not the sources of the suffering. They're not the sources of the malaise. What the actual suffering is coming from is within us. And so there's no hard and fast rule for what is something to be avoided and what is something that you don't need to worry about. It's going to be very individual because this deals with your own discipline. And it's your pain that is felt when your senses are ripped away by an object that distracts you, right? When somebody turns on a TV and you're trying to read a book, it's not pleasant to have your eyes constantly turned up towards a TV. When you're trying to type out an email to a friend and there's a song playing in the background and you keep finding yourself drifting off and listening to it and you're not getting anything typed, then it's your pain that is felt. But in that same situation, somebody else might not have a problem. So sense restraint is dealing with our own personal experience of discipline over our senses and our self-knowledge of what triggers us, what distracts us, what annoys us, what deludes us, and what doesn't. And through beginning to become accustomed to this, we start to lay down ground rules for how to be in the world. This is an innovation. It's a step of training. Just as when we find that morality is, there's just huge amounts of suffering in our life coming from arguments, from violence, from drugs, from impropriety. We cut that out. we establish ground rules and we practice and we try to find better ways of being and we succeed. Sense restraint is the same thing. It's not necessary, but it's an option. And if we apply ourselves to it, we ourselves will feel the results. It is our suffering that gets relieved. Nobody else is suffering. I mean, we're sitting there, with calm faculties, with restrained senses. The person next to us could still get distracted by stuff going on in their environment. But we ourselves can be architects of our own freedom, peace. So this is what this deals with. It deals with coming to know ourselves, coming to know our senses and what triggers them, so that we can direct them and have them and set our environment and set ground rules so that we're not in that state. We're not in that state of anxiety or distraction. Now let's look for a second at what the Buddha says in the gradual training or the step-by-step training in regards to sense restraint. And this is the paragraph. It shows up a few dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen times in the Pali Canon with very little change. And this is, canonically, this is pretty much the whole gist of what's taught. Everything else is up to us to figure out. All right, so how does a mendicant guard the sense doors? When a mendicant sees a sight with their eyes, they don't get caught up in the features and details. If the faculty of sight were left unrestrained, bad, unskillful qualities of desire and aversion would become overwhelming. For this reason, they practice restraint, protecting their faculty of sight and achieving its restraint. Just as when they hear sounds with the ears, or they smell an odor with their nose, or they taste a flavor with their tongue, they feel a touch with their body. And when they know a thought with their mind, they don't get caught up in the features and details. For if the faculty of mind were left unrestrained, bad, unskillful qualities of desire and aversion would become overwhelming. For this reason, they practice restraint, protecting the faculty of mind and achieving its restraint. When they have this noble sense restraint, they experience an unsullied bliss inside themselves. And that's how a mendicant guards their sense doors. Right? And that comes from Digha Nikaya 2, the fruits of the holy life. It's a very simple passage, right? So it's talking about protecting your sense doors, knowing what things cause desire and aversion to arise, noting that, and noting when it's specific features of that object. Again, you're using a computer or a phone right now to be part of this. So it's not the computer or the phone that causes you the suffering, but certain things you do with the computer or phone cause you suffering. So on your way to this talk, did you stop by your email box? Did you check Facebook? Did you thumb through some text messages? If so, what was that experience like? And were there traps in there that you didn't expect? Often we go to the email box looking for something important. And what tends to happen is we get stuck with stuff that's moderately important or important to somebody else, but not really what we were doing at the moment. And so we have to work through it, and we end up spending some time doing that. And it's just almost never do we get just what we were looking for. There's always something else. We go to check a specific thing, but there's advertisements, there's pop-ups, there's notifications. And little by little, our time is drained away. So by protecting our faculty, we will say ahead of time, okay, if I'm going to use this, I'm going to use it in just this way, or I'm going to avoid that particular thing at this moment. I'm going to save that for a time when I go in knowing what I'm going to get, being prepared for it, being ready for it. So it's the case. I mean, you've set your environment for meditation, right? You've tried to limit the exterior stuff going on. but to a certain degree, you don't have total control. So at that point, it has to be about your own discipline. You can't make your neighbors cease to exist. You can't, there's no button to turn off a barking dog. It's up to you to kind of figure out how to be with that, because not everything is under our control. But there's ways to work with it. And that's what we're going to talk about. Because again, this is not a requirement. So this is not even yet part of meditation, which is sometimes it's hard to point to without talking like I don't think meditation is important. Meditation is hugely important. But again, mindfulness and meditation and samadhi are coming later on in the step-by-step training. This has to be established beforehand, but this doesn't even involve meditation. This involves how you are before you sit down on the cushion. This involves how you approach life and how you look after the state of your mind at all times. Fully half of the path to full enlightenment, the first 4 stages, stream entry and once returning, don't require meditation, but they do, especially at the level of once returning, require sense restraint. And if that's all too technical and you don't quite know what it means, just set it aside. But to say that this is something a lot like morality. You are not just going to sit down and try to be calm. You're not just going to sit down and try to ignore the things around you. The Buddha is not holding that up as a virtue. He's not holding that up as the ideal. You are not trying to turn off your senses. You're not trying to not think or not feel or not see. You are trying to make your senses a vehicle for peace. You're trying to establish a sense of control and discipline around them so that they bring into your mind a sense of pure and unsullied bliss. And who doesn't want that, right? Your senses can be the thing that makes samadhi, that makes mindfulness, that makes meditation pleasant, but only if they are controlled. Yeah. So now let's get ready for a sort of guided meditation. But again, as I said, it won't fully be meditation. Now we'll obviously be doing what we do while we meditate. We'll be sitting calmly. We'll be in a quiet environment. We'll have set the time aside. We won't be getting up in the middle. So all of this is the same, but I'm going to be asking you to think. I'm going to be asking you to consider. And now sometimes in meditation, we're just trying to be with an experience. So we're not figuring things out, because that can become an obsession too. But in this particular instance, it'll really help us throughout the day and ongoing in a practice of sense restraint. So back in the time of Ajahn Chah, who was a Thai forest master in the last century, he in rural Thailand, it would be normal to have chickens. Chickens make eggs. Eggs make omelets. Omelets make everything better. So everybody would have chickens, and chickens would just be roaming around doing whatever. And this most of the time was okay, but at certain times, like before a storm, or if wild animals were roaming about, grabbing up the chickens, you would need some way of keeping tabs on where the chicken was. And now it's very hard in the jungle with rudimentary tools to create a pen that would actually contain the chickens or keep out predators. It's almost impossible. It's even impossible in the modern day with, sheet metal and wire and all sorts of things, but so much more so in the jungle back in the day. So what they would do instead was they would create these little wicker baskets. So rather than creating a big enclosure to try to keep the chicken in, and so you know where it is, they would just take this big basket and put it over the chicken. And of course, the chicken, is going from being able to do whatever it wanted to having a small enclosure. and it resisted. But it could only resist to a point. The reality is the basket was not suffering. It wasn't painful to be in the basket. It was in an odd way safe. Yeah. Because before there was danger, and now there was safety and security, and the chicken would, after walking around for a minute, kind of sit down and just be calm. Yeah. Likewise for a fish, you might take a tropical fish out of the ocean where every moment of the day it's avoiding a predator. And you might put it in an aquarium, and now it can swim around freely, and it's just calm. It's just chilling out. It's looking under the rock. It sees the little scuba man, some bubbles, watches the bubbles some more. That's its life. Now the fish could be like, I wish I could get out of here. But what would happen if it did? It can't breathe air. So the aquarium is actually a safe space for it. Now, this is to say that our immediate experience of sense restraint might be of constriction. It might be of limiting the infinite potential to do and see and experience whatever we want. So at the first application, this is why people don't do it naturally. It might seem a bit unpleasant to kind of cut off the ability to do whatever we want. But we're going to look at the experience, and we're going to see if doing whatever we want and allowing the mind to just leap out at things is actually pleasant, or if that is not a kind of suffering that we have just been allowing to happen. Right? We're going to do this. We're going to take each of the senses, and we're going to assess our current environment. So if this is where we're going to be doing the majority of our meditation, this is where the day is going to be happening, then this is where we can start to pay attention and establish the discipline. So now, in terms of the eye faculty, just survey your space. What do you have around you? What does it mean? What stories are coming up? How's the lighting? Are there distractions nearby? Is there a window? Are there people or animals moving about? Are there screens? Is there TVs, phones, computers? Yeah. So before applying sense restraint, any of these things are an object that your eye could leap to and associate with. So we're going to do a quick assessment. Is there anything in your current environment which you assess to be a normal, a mundane, a boring, a safe sense contact? And for me, I don't feel very strongly about a lot of this stuff, but I'm a monk, so it's technically not mine. I could walk away from it at any minute, but there's nevertheless, there's some stuff that's intrinsically just like means nothing to me. Like there's a pole here, in the middle of the room. And it's just a pole, and it's just sitting there. It's got some carpet on it, so that people don't get concussions. And that's a normal and boring and stable sensory object. So the first thing we're going to do is, when we assess something is safe, is we're going to let ourselves know that anytime I just want to look at something, that's a safe object. Anytime I'm moving around the room, that can be in my sense fields without any problems. Now, it's not that we have to, always keep that in our field of view at all times, but it can become a safe, stable point of reference, right? That's something that's not bugging me. It's not bugging me. It's not telling me stories. There's no desire. There's no aversion. And now you can't see my pole. You can't see the pole in the middle of my room. So you've got to find in your own room where the computer or the phone switched off. completely up to you. What is a safe thing? And it might be a wall, it might be a plant, it might be the light coming in through a window. It could be anything. It could be something simple like this plant up here. Yeah. It's green, it's colorful, but it's safe. It's pretty and safe because you don't proliferate about it much. And also, once you've thought of some safe sense objects, give yourself the credit and just kind of say what are some unsafe objects. Like the screen of the phone, titles on a bookshelf, looking out the window at a street. Now, it's not that you've got to protect yourself and shield it and get rid of these things, but it's that you should allow yourself to develop a sense of conscientiousness, care, being careful whenever that object is around, because it could lead you into distraction, it could lead you into attraction, into aversion. And that's great. Maybe Andrew, you're seeing something and you're like, okay, yeah, that thing, that book that I keep like thinking, oh, I really need to read that. What if I were to just put that under here? And that's exactly what we can be doing. Yeah. We can silence notifications. We can set the phone in another room. We can just drape a little curtain over the bookshelf. Or at another level, for the things we can't control, like out a window, whenever we approach that window, maybe a little voice is saying, okay, now be careful. And this is when, if we can't avoid contact with something, we can't avoid seeing something out that window, we nevertheless don't dwell on its features. We don't find ourselves thinking, oh, there's that car, or oh, there's that person. We just allow it to be sense contact. We just allow it to, okay, there's stuff going on out there. We allow ourselves to know that without dwelling on what. So now how does this feel? And just try switching between these. So the sense of no harm at all from your safe objects versus the sense of a little bit of guardedness around the objects that are not safe. And now you can know that to completely let your eyes go, you can be distracted for hours and then feel miserable and beat yourself up about it. So the little bit of discomfort you get from restraining your eyes is small in comparison. And this is exactly how the path works. You're assessing lots of suffering versus a little suffering. I'll go with the little suffering of sense restraint. And then from the little bit of suffering to no suffering at all, and in fact, a little bit of pleasantness. And that's paying attention to things that are neutral. And now you're going from things that are mildly pleasant to things that are very pleasant. And that's when you've completely protected your senses so that there's no danger at all. So you can drop that sense of guardedness. And at that point, all of your neutral stuff is going to become just great. Yeah? Because this is how it feels, is we're always using energy in our senses. And what would it be like if we had that energy back in the mind? Because there is no more danger, because there's no more distraction, because there's no more desire. That would be exceedingly pleasant. And that whole mass of suffering would be gone. And now with the ear. So when I woke up this morning, when I wake up many mornings, I have a routine that I do before the morning meditation, and it involves making coffee and setting up the space for meditation, because people come in and join. And I've got to go through it quite quickly. And sometimes I'll have a Dhamma talk or something, and I'll pop it in, or some little bit of news, just to kind of wake me up and let me know what's going on. But I've noticed lately that creates a bit of distraction, of tension. And so in training, I said, well, what's a neutral sound in my environment? And if I don't have something going on in my ear, in my earbud, I can always hear the refrigerator. Yeah. The refrigerator always has this kind of boring, simple, no harm done kind of hum. And it's not an aggressive hum. It's not like a clank, 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 clank. It's just a hum. Now, you might have something in your environment that's simple and repetitive and neutral. And this can even be like the sound of the wind or wildlife outside. And that's not necessarily repetitive, but it can still be consistent and neutral. And that's okay. So allow yourself to kind of associate, like, what are some regular, consistent, neutral sounds in your environment, things that you don't have to worry about. Okay. Now, I've got a particularly good scenario here because there are a lot of people visiting upstairs and outside. And so there's footsteps, there's movement, there's doors opening and closing, there's people talking to each other. Now, all of those I've assessed could lead to distraction. And furthermore, just thinking about them has me like a slightly unsettled because it's not consistent, because it could mean something, because it's sporadic, because my mind just naturally tries to figure out what it is. So those I'm not engaging with the features and details of. It's going on, but there's a slight bit of guardedness. I'm just not thinking about it much. And you might find there are things in your environment, like the sound of traffic or people nearby, or a particularly clanky bit of machinery that does bother you a bit. And if you can't get away from it, then simply establish this discipline. I'm not going to dwell on those sounds, and see for yourself. Move your mind from those kind of sounds to the neutral sound, and then back, and then back. Do you see the difference? There's a palpable difference between the neutral sound and the one that you have to be guarded. So then we're just going to stay with the neutral sounds. This is a fantastic basis of mindfulness. Those who've been with me for guided meditations before know that I almost always mention the sounds in the environment, especially the neutral, consistent sounds. So like no easier way to establish a thread of continuity in our mindfulness than to have something like that as a backdrop that you can use as a frame of reference. Now, the nose faculty will probably be much less. I mean, taste is even less, but are there any smells in your environment? And probably not a lot, because we get acclimated. Now think, in the last 40 minutes, have you been exposed to a particularly disturbing smell? Yeah, it might have been garbage, it might have been a bathroom, it might have been smog coming in the window. And just think, did that make the mind wobble? Did you like, where's that coming from? It's like, oh no, I need to clean something, or oh, I got to throw that out. Maybe it was mold. Maybe it was something an animal left. Yeah, could be anything. Now just think what it would be like to just be a little careful. It's like, if every time I go by that bathroom with the leaky faucet, I smell mildew. So I'm just going to be careful when I go by that, because I always think about that, and I always beat myself up for not recaulking things in there. But then most of the time you won't have to do anything. But now, is there any kind of sense of neutral smell? And here, I light incense, and for me, that's not an attractive smell. It is pleasant, but not like a potpourri kind of like hit you in the face. This is pleasant, but just like it's a backdrop. It's neutral. Maybe there's a smell of a blanket, like that newly laundered smell. Maybe there's a comforting smell. Maybe your shirts after they've been worn for a day or two, and you just kind of smell like meat, and that's normal. Yeah. Or it could be anything. Maybe a new chair that you got that has a kind of leathery, fresh kind of smell. And these can be a neutral and not disturbing kind of smell to use as a backdrop. And again, you might not be able to be consistently aware of them, but start to develop this mindfulness. Like if you find yourself caught where you're being drawn towards an annoying smell, is that neutral one present? And what would it be like to instead be like, yeah, that thing's there, but I can still smell the new chair. I can still smell the incense in the background. And that gives us, it's not that we like, okay, just pay attention to the incense, just pay attention to the incense. There is no garbage. There is no garbage. That's not what we're doing, because we don't have to. The garbage can be there. It's only when we obsess about it and we focus on it and we get drawn to it that it becomes a problem. Now with taste, that's coming up. That'll be coming up when we do lunch, and you can work with that. Now there are neutral, safe tastes, right? Think of rice, simple, nourishing. Think of salt. Salt is not exciting. It's nice, but it's not like different. It's just salt. Everybody knows what salt is like. Or the taste of like beans. If you were to have some kind of curry or something, bean is a kind of slightly nutritive kind of savory taste, but also fairly bland. It's like putting a coin in your mouth. It's just minerals, right? And you don't have to put a coin in your mouth to know what that's like. It's like we have pretty good memory of our tastes, don't we? But now the taste of a cupcake, the taste of an exciting soup might have a lot of stuff going on. You're like, oh, there's this flavor, there's this flavor, there's this flavor. That in and of itself is not necessarily dangerous if we just get that one taste. But you can find that whenever you think about food, you start to think about the tastes involved. And we usually don't dwell a lot on the stuff that tastes bad, except out of regret. Like, oh man, that was so awful. I can still taste it in my mouth. Now, we usually don't think to the fridge and think of all of the not tasty stuff that's in our fridge, right? That's just not a normal state to be in. We usually think about the tasty stuff. So in terms of mindfulness around tastes, think, is there anything in our environment that we could get that we would be attracted to, that we'd be interested in, that we'd be drawn to? And it may not even be in our cupboard. It may not even be in our fridge. It may be a cart down the street or a restaurant around the corner. Yeah. And if so, and if that's something that we sometimes go to, is to go around to the gas station and get a pint of ice cream. It's like, if that's something that is an option, then we set the mindfulness right now. We might do that again, but that's not something we're going to do today. Yeah. Just today, we're going to put down the chicken cage and we're going to see if the mind doesn't settle a bit. If it wasn't just the possibility of that was keeping us anxious. And now this is work. Yeah, but it's good work. As I say, it reaps rewards. And so you might even make a list. The things might change as you go along, but the list is important. The knowledge is important. This is your training. And it doesn't change dramatically. This is something you kind of only have to do a few times. Yeah. But it's something that you don't get by default. You can't just read that paragraph on sense restraint and then you're restrained in the senses, or you can't just set your vision a certain distance ahead and you won't get caught. You can't just only eat from a particular restaurant and never get caught thinking about food. I'm sorry. The discipline is something different. So it's your discipline, take ownership of it. What's safe? What do you need to be careful about? Once you've got those two things set up, it's a training. You will get better and your mind will begin to settle. Now, the final one we will talk about in this sense, because mindfulness of the mind and the mind as a sense base is the whole crux of mindfulness meditation. Yeah, seeing the funny things that your mind does. But at the basic level, your mind is going to be associating with sense objects. This is the entry level human being status. You were born in a sensual world with 5 senses. That's how they work. Your mind is going to be thinking about the 5 senses. It's not until you've really developed the mind that it starts thinking in terms of concepts or in terms of nimittas, that is ideas and impressions. You won't even be aware that that's how the mind functions for a while. So let's just deal with the 5 senses. But the 5th one is very interesting and important, and is also going to be with us a lot as we get into meditation, and that is the body. The interesting thing about the body is it's like our body, right? So as the sense base, everything that we sense through the body base, we identify with. Now, this happens at the eye too. Like our eye gets caught on a screen and we're like, oh, I got to get control over my eyes. They're going crazy. Now that we do identify with that a bit, but I'm not identifying with the pole. I'm not thinking it's me seeing the pole. Most of the time, it's just like there's a pole there and that's it. And at the ear, it's very hard to establish a sense of identity in terms of our relationship with sounds. Mostly we spend all of our energy trying to figure out what the sound is. And we spend very little trying to identify with it and figure out what it means to us. Yeah, it happens, but again, it's not the main go-to. But with the body, it's the exact opposite. The go-to in terms of the body sense space is identification. So we have an impression, and the first thing we do is we say, that's happening to me. Where is that on me? What does this mean to me? And this is why, in terms of the body sense base, there's a lot of different things that can happen, like tingling and warmth and cold and roughness and heaviness and lightness and flutteriness and joy. All of this stuff can be going on, but still it all has the same kind of flavor. It's sort of like, it's sort of like a soup, that has stuff floating in it, but then the broth, no matter what part of the soup you're in, it has the same kind of flavor. This is our body, and that flavor is identification. So one of the most important things for us to do is not to figure out what impacts at the body are safe and which are neutral, but to start to establish which ones do we identify with strongly and instantly and impulsively, and which ones can we understand to be just sense data. This is just a feeling, this is just a sensation. So that is where we're applying the restraint, that is where we're applying the mindfulness. The ones that are gripping, the ones that we have a lot of stories and fear about, those are the ones we're careful about. The ones that we can just feel and don't mean much, those are the ones that we rely on. Those are the ones that we want to have, like the hum of the refrigerator or the bland pull in the middle of the room. Those are the ones that we want to be able to rely on and have be consistent, always kind of be there. It's like, oh, what's going on with my body? Let me look for the neutral one. So what's the neutral one? Maybe if you're standing or if you're sitting in a chair, maybe it's the feeling of your feet making contact with the floor. And when you're moving or walking, there might be more identification with that. But when you're sitting, they're just kind of there and they're held there by gravity. You don't really have to make them be there. So you can just kind of feel that. And it's like just a neutral, bland, doesn't mean anything kind of feeling. That's what it's like for a foot to rest on the ground. One that works fairly well for me is whenever a breeze brushes by my skin. For me, this is a very external kind of thing. And it doesn't happen all the time. The air is not always moving, or it's not always moving enough for me to detect it. But to some degree, the air is always there. And even though the breeze might only be detectable at certain times, my mind feels safe with the fact that there is movement in the air. And yet it doesn't identify with it. Like, I'm not making the wind. The wind is just blowing by. And for me, it's cool, it's safe, it's relaxing, and it takes me out of identification. Yeah. So this is going to require some investigation more than any of the other sense bases, because again, the go-to will be your mind quickly identifying with a sensation and making a story about it. And that's such an inherent part of how we relate to the world. It started from the moment of conception. We've been doing that. That's how we haven't gotten killed. It's helped us. But in terms of training the mind, it is a distraction, and it is tangibly painful to allow ourselves to be distracted, as we can sit on a meditation cushion for years and spend the entire time with our mind just leaping towards sensations in the body and never settling. The only way it could settle would be if it's paying attention to things that don't bring up that sense of identification, and we've got to find those things. And the unfortunate thing about the mind is that it gets used to things, yeah, especially when it starts looking for things. So it can be really good to find a sense contact that is not always there. Like if you were to use the breeze going by, that's good because it's impermanent. You can't make the breeze, just like you can't make a bird chirp consistently. Yeah, it would run out. Its batteries would die. The same as a breeze is there sometimes and it's not others. And so you can't identify with it, you can't expect it, you can't anticipate it. But now certain sensations like a tingling in your hands, a sense of energy or pulsing or whatever, are not good to use because you can expect those and you can try to make them happen. Like if you were to squeeze your hands really tightly, it might start to tingle. If you were to move your mind in particular ways, you might be able to feel tension arise and fall in your arms. So this would exacerbate your sense of control. This would exacerbate your sense of I'm doing this. So try to look for things that you're not doing, things that are just happening, like the cloth that's draped over you. Gravity's causing it to drape. You're not wearing it. It's on you. The same as if you draped it on a chair. It would just sit there, not because the chair is wearing it. It's just on the chair. Okay, so try to find something, and this whole day, you're going to have to be catching yourself. And this is what it's like to have a body. I'm sorry. This stuff is always happening in it, and it always seems really important. But I tell you, this is where you will get the most rewards and the most peace, is when you establish discipline over this particular sense base. and you are willing to let go of those things that you can identify with and you can say are me and I'm in control of and I'm doing this. And at first it'll feel like you're putting a cage on yourself. You're like, come on, I just want to think about my knee, it hurts. Well, should you be a little careful about that? Could it lead to places? Could it lead to decisions? Could it lead to getting up? Could it lead to stopping meditating? Yeah. But now the breeze, the feeling of your feet, the feeling of your clothing, some things can be just neutral. Yeah? And those are okay. And those can lead to a sense of stability. We'll talk a bit more about that stability this afternoon. But now we've been sitting here for about an hour, so you can assess for yourselves. We're going to have some group meditation, and that's till 11:45. So what I suggest is for the next 2.5 hours, decide for yourself, do you want to sit or do you want to walk? And at the half-hour mark, again, decide, do you want to sit or do you want to walk? But then we'll all come back together at 11 Eastern, which whatever time that is for you. In the last 45 minutes, we can sit together. Okay? All right, so go practice Dhamma warriors. Yeah? And yeah, take notes if you need. Mental notes or written notes. Figure this out. Figure it out for yourself. And you will get the results by the end of the day.